Hello, and welcome to the ADE Spotlight Podcast. My name is Jim Haggerty. As a provider of substance abuse assessments and client management databases, we have the privilege to work with terrific partners across the United States and Canada. In this series, we plan to talk to some of our colleagues about their work in the field of substance abuse assessment, prevention, and treatment. By sharing knowledge and experiences, it is my hope that we can all learn from each other. What we have learned, what the challenges are now and in the future, and how the ever-evolving technology impacts our work. ADE remains committed to working with our partners and using our experience with both substance use assessment and technology to provide the tools our colleagues rely on. As we learn from each other, we improve the value of our services. Well, my guest this morning is Ray Daugherty, the founder of Prevention Research Institute. We will, for the sake of brevity, be using the term PRI for Prevention Research Institute. But first of all, Ray, I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us this morning. This has been on my list of podcasts I'd like to do. When I sat down to think about who I wanted to talk to, PRI was very high on the list. So
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
I'm hoping that not only myself, but the listeners here can learn a little bit more about what it is that you do. Now, just on a side note, I have been aware of PRI and been involved to some degree with them for almost a dozen years now, and I've been very impressed. And so that is the reason that I wanted to spend this time talking to you and find out a little bit more about what it is that you do and how it is that you came to develop the philosophy that you have and the approach that you have. But let's go back even further. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background prior to the formation of PRI and the sort of the events and the thinking that led to the development of your company?
Sure. I started working in the addictions field in 1971. This was during the Vietnam War, and I was in the Army and doing what the Army called social work / psychology specialist. And President Nixon decided that all overseas Army installations needed to have an alcohol and drug program. At that time, of course, drug use in Vietnam was very high, and it had spread into other locations as well. So I was in the first wave of people that were sent out to do that, and went to Camp Zama, Japan, and helped set up the Army's alcohol and drug program there. Stayed there for 2 years. Left, and really by that time I was sort of hooked on this field. I just didn't want to do anything other than addictions work, and I became the director of a brand new concept at that time. It was only the third social setting detoxification program in the country, set up in Lexington, Kentucky. And then a year later became director of the Kentucky Alcoholism Council, and it was there that I became fascinated with prevention and what could be done in the way of face-to-face interventions, small group interventions, and began work to, at that time, try to figure out how to make it better, and that's what ultimately led to the development of PRI.
Was there something unique about PRI's approach? Were there other services available? Were people doing similar things at that time?
Well, people were doing small group interventions, but nobody was doing quite what we do, and still nobody does quite what we do. When people set out to develop for lack of a better phrase, an educational program, and I think what we do really goes beyond that. It's a motivational intervention. But when people set out to do anything that looks at all like education, what typically they do is start with, well, what do we think people need to know? Or what do we think might be interesting to people, or what do we think might get people's attention? And we started from a very different place. I became very aware that while people liked the programs that we did, I became concerned about what they were not telling us. And what they were not saying was, I'm going to change my alcohol or drug use as a result of this program. We weren't hearing that. And what I first wanted to do was just find what worked, what had evidence that it changed behavior, and I just wanted to adopt it. And when I started looking at the research, I found there were no programs at that time, mid-1970s. There were no programs that had documented impact on behavior. There were a few programs that had shown change in attitudes, There were a lot of programs that had shown changes in knowledge, but really at that time, the only programs that had impacted behavior at all had actually negatively impacted it. That is, there was more alcohol or drug use after the intervention than before. And so I tried to figure out what was going wrong and what could we do to make it more effective. I thought I would perhaps discover that by doing an in-depth review of the research literature on the etiology of alcoholism and drug addiction. And what happened, I naively thought that would be about a 6-month process. It took 3 years to get a start on it, and it's a task that we're still doing now, 33 years later. This curriculum has a 33-year history. We're on the 9th version, and reviewing research and integrating that research has been a constant part of that process. But what we did was we identified the behaviors we wanted to change and then worked backwards and tried to discover what attitudes, what beliefs were associated with those behaviors. And that we could not find in the research literature, because the research up to that point on attitudes about alcohol and drug use had been comparing users and non-users. Well, we got very interested in levels of use. What about people who are engaged in high-risk drinking versus low-risk drinking? And we found there were no really definitions of that at that time. So we developed the first set of low-risk guidelines for alcohol use in the United States. And then we began researching around that and said, well, what are the attitudes that might separate abstainers, low-risk drinkers, or high-risk drinkers from each other? And what we found was, while research had not been successful in finding much of an impact much of a delineation between attitudes of low risk and high risk drinkers, between abstainers and drinkers, we found a very clear delineation between low risk drinkers and high risk drinkers. They had a very different profile. So now we had a set of beliefs and attitudes that were associated with high-risk use, and we could begin to target. And then we started putting together an intervention where we were asking ourselves, what does research tell us about the nature of alcohol and drug problems that might impact people's attitudes and beliefs on the specific attitudes and beliefs we wanted to change in order to try to change the behaviors. And so we went about it in a fundamentally different way. And we looked at research from the persuasion literature, communications literature on how to communicate messages in a way that gets attitude and belief change. And we structured it around that. And after going through a long developmental process, then we set up a randomized trial of it and found that we did, in fact, with this approach, impact behaviors. And in that case, we were looking at a parent education program where we found that we could impact the behaviors of the parents, and within 6 months, the behaviors of their children started showing change. And we did nothing with the children, only with the parents. So from that, then we began to spread out and build an organization around learning more and helping other people learn how to do this.
What kind of people did you have on that initial team?
Well, the initial team was very small, and in the initial work, I was pulling in whoever I could pull in from universities who got interested in it. So I had a communications researcher, I had a health education researcher who worked with me in this process, and the process of testing it. In terms of the very beginning of it, it was just me at the beginning. And one other person who was helping me who put together the workbook part of it. And then about a year later, I met Terry O'Brien, and she and I started working together on this work because she really had a lot to bring to the table on that. And so we started reworking the curriculum, and that really became the initial partnership around which this was all built, and now it's spread out to a lot of people. There's now 18 states that have adopted the Prime for Life program. 3 of the branches of uniformed services have adopted it for their worldwide use. And so we have a lot of people out there working in partnership with us now. in addition to the people on staff and the contract trainers.
I'm curious about the first version, though. Are we talking about the late 70s, early 80s in that time frame?
Yes, started putting it together in the late 70s. We were testing it by 1981, and by 82 we had discovered that in fact it worked in terms of behavior change, and so then in 83 I incorporated PRI, and on 84 we opened our doors.
And how was that? How was it received out in the field initially?
Initially, it was a hard sell, because what we were doing was fundamentally different than what people were doing at that time and the way they were thinking. Because one of the things that had stood out to me, as I looked at the models of etiology of, say, alcoholism, because at that time the fields were quite separate. Alcoholism and addiction were two distinct fields at that time. And looking at the models of etiology of alcoholism that were prevailing at that time, none of them took into account that alcohol itself would play a role. They were all psychosocial models, saying that alcoholism would develop because of a variety of personality traits or a variety of social conditions. And as I looked at it, I thought, this makes no sense, because any specific alcohol problem involves the intake of alcohol, not just the intake of alcohol, the intake of a certain amount of alcohol. So we came to think of high-risk consumptions of it. So if you look at any specific alcohol problem, all of them are that way, and yet when they were combined into alcoholism, people were saying it had nothing to do with alcohol. At that time, there were slogans and there were posters that were used in alcoholism education that would say things like, alcoholism does not come in bottles, it comes in people, or alcoholism is not an alcohol problem, it's a people problem. And when I first sat down and talked about our approach with the representative of one of the national organizations that works in alcoholism, I won't name them, but the person's hand started shaking, and I said, literally, and I said, what's wrong? Your hands are shaking. And she said, if I took this to my board, I would be fired. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, this would imply that alcohol causes alcoholism. And at the heart of our approach is it's the quantity and frequency of use plus biological factors that we're born with in varying degrees. So it's a combination of biology plus our choices, just like heart disease. We're born with varying levels of risk for heart disease, and then our lifestyle choices will determine whether it's triggered or not. Or just like many forms of cancer, or just like type 2 diabetes. All of these things are lifestyle-related health problems, and we really were the first people in our field to start talking about that way. And at first, that was very foreign to people. And then later, the idea of giving low-risk guidelines for alcohol use during the heat of the zero-tolerance approach became very controversial. So our work was at first a hard sell, and that's one of the things that has changed so much. Is right now it's a fairly easy sell, because people now have come to see these basic principles that biology determines our level of risk for all kinds of health problems, and then our lifestyle choices are at the heart of tipping the balance into whether the problem develops or not. So that's been a huge change that's happened in the 33 years that we've been doing this, and it's been very heartening to see.
What do you think was the tipping point? Can you identify a period of time where you saw attitudes and mindsets start to change?
I think it was a clustering of several things that happened. One was just happening in our larger society. We were starting to become more aware as a society that our lifestyle was perhaps the biggest risk factor in our lives. We started seeing that for all types of health problems, and certainly all the leading causes of death in our country, they very much have a lifestyle component. And that idea just started settling in with people more. And I remember when we first started, just as an example of that, virtually nobody we talked to in the general public would say that diabetes had a lifestyle component. Well, now we understand that. Now it's widely understood that it does. And in the early days, when we asked people, can we do anything to change our cholesterol level, the most common answer we got was no. And now people understand we can, through various lifestyle changes, affect that. So that was one change. I think another change that happened that made it easier for people to adopt this was the beginning of the application of the public health model to addictions. And the third, I think, was that growing up at the same time we were growing up was motivational interviewing. And a lot of the ways of thinking in motivational interviewing and a lot of the ways of thinking in our work are very compatible. And so I think all of those things together, plus I would like to think that our work played a role in that as well. And at this point, there have been perhaps 5 million Americans that have been through Prime for Life. So I've got to believe that we have played a role in that as well. And it has been interesting to me to see sometimes our words come back through other people who haven't directly experienced our work, but it's the effect of a message going to from one person to another, and then it comes right back full circle. So I think all of those things combined have made this seismic shift, really, in the thinking of the public.
I've had the fortunate ability to interact with some of your folks, interact with them, watch them work, and I am impressed. You have a very talented and accomplished staff of people. How did you go about putting together your team? What do you look for when you look to add to your team? Because it is an impressive group of folks.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much, and it's something I hear a lot of people, saying this is an unusually talented group of people. And there's several things. One is we began to grow. I tried to look for people who were smarter than me. I think that's an important thing, that we bring in people who can really add to the work. Another thing is we look for people who are passionate about this work. Passionate about it. And I'd have to say everybody on our staff, I think, fits that. They believe in what we are doing to the core of their being, and they have experienced the power of what we're doing in their own lives. Very often people come to work with us because they have experienced this program and what it can do, what it's done in their life and what it can do in other people's lives. And they develop a sense of mission about it, really, that they feel like this is a life's work that they are doing that makes a difference. And we only will bring people on staff when they've developed a very high level of expertise. We have very high expectations of people, and I think in general they exceed our expectations, our very high expectations. So we look for people who are passionate, look for people who are skilled, look for people who have a sense of mission about this work, who deeply believe in it, and have a broad range of skills, but some specialty. Like we've got a couple of people on staff whose specialty is reviewing research. And so when we need to know, what does the brain research tell us? What does research on marijuana tell us? What does research on alcohol tell us about X subject? We can go to those people, and they've got a grasp of it. We have well over 2,000 scientific references that support what we're doing in the program, and we rely on being able to digest large amounts of data and put it into usable tools that the field can use. And other people have other skills, building systems. We work with systems mostly. And so we're trying to build individual instructor and counselor skills while also helping systems become stronger. And so that I think the systems that we work with after a few years of working with us pretty generally say, wow, our system is better now than it was. And that's what we're looking for. And individuals will say, I am better now than I was before.
That doesn't surprise me at all from what I've seen with your staff and how they interact with people and their level of knowledge and their skill level, their personalities, as well as their wisdom and experience. They come through very clear. But one of the things that I've noticed over the years, Ray, whether it's when working with some of the instructors that PRI certifies and trains, or whether it's been in other environments where I'm talking to groups of substance abuse professionals, is that they generally tend to be older. I wonder if you are seeing in the instructors that you are training and certifying, are you seeing a younger generation come forward to do this sort of work? It's one of the concerns that I have is when I speak to groups of professionals, they tend to be older, and I wonder where the younger folks are going to come from.
Jim, I think that's a very legitimate question, and I like you, I observe that among counselors in our field, among instructors who are doing indicated prevention work, there has been sort of an aging process, at least in those that we work with, and I think in part, when people have job satisfaction, when they feel like they're making a difference, they want to stay in it. And one of the things that struck me 25 years ago in this field was the incredible rate of turnover. People were getting frustrated easily, and they wouldn't last long. There was some research done several years ago that said the average length of time for addiction counselors in any given agency is about a year. Well, we don't see that. What we see is people who are around 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. We have people who are still delivering Prime for Life who were with us 30 years ago. And they're still finding job satisfaction. So it doesn't lend itself to turnover as much, and turnover is where you get younger blood coming in. So I think that is an issue. It is, however, something that I have great hope for. It's not like it's universal, because we see some very talented young people coming in as well. And we want to hopefully get that same level of interest, that same spark of enthusiasm in those younger people as well, so that they become the next generation of 20 and 30 year veterans in this kind of work. So yes, we are an aging population, it seems to me, but I do see younger people coming in and doing an incredibly good job.
As an aside, I began in this field in the mid-1980s. My first job, Ray, was in an inpatient facility, a 76-bed facility. It was staffed at that time primarily by recovering individuals.
Yes.
Generally, they may have had some college, but they were not master's degree counselors or social workers. They generally came and brought their own experience to it.
And a lot of heart.
And a lot of heart, very much so. And that has changed considerably over the 30-plus years.
Yes.
As has technology.
That's true.
And so, maybe that's something we can touch on here is how has technology changed or improved the way that your services are delivered?
We really try to stay on the edge of technology, both internally and for the people that use Prime for Life or Prime Solutions. Internally, our staff is spread around the country. We have people literally from coast to coast, from Seattle, Washington to Miami, Florida, and a variety of points in between. And we could not hold this together without a strong technology infrastructure. it's just something that we've become dependent on it. I don't know how we would do as much as we do without the technology. On the other hand, we really try to provide quality media to go with the programs that we give people, that we bring to people. We are not in the camp of let's have 6 or 8 45-minute videos in a 10-hour program. No, that's not what we do. But we do have a lot of video and animations in short pieces designed to help make real very specific points and add emotional arousal when needed to very specific points. So, and we also have a lot of still images, so that whether a person is doing Prime for Life, which is an indicated prevention program, or whether they're doing Prime Solutions, which is a tool for counselors to use in treatment, there's rich media for people to deliver, and we've done it all. When we first started, we didn't have rich media. We had overhead transparencies. And we moved from that to 35 millimeter slides, and we moved from that to compact disc interactive CDI, which most people have never heard of, but it was an interactive compact disc technology. And then we moved to DVD, and now we've got it all in a computer-based app. And it's responsive and it's updatable, and that kind of thing I see the future in. That instead of having to do a major change in the program that every few years becomes this massive thing for people to learn, I see a day coming very soon when we will make incremental changes as we learn. And so people using the program won't have to have a massive thing to get accustomed to of a new version. Rather, here's one little piece to change at a time. And when we discover an error, we can change it because all of this is updatable through the app. I see that kind of technology just for the delivery as being very critical to the future. And the hopes I've got beyond that. I would love to see a day when everybody's sitting in a room together using their own tablet device, and the instructor or the counselor is helping people work through individual things as a piece of what they do, not to replace the person-to-person interaction, but to supplement that. I think there's a lot of things can be done in the future, and that we don't have to fear technology. We can embrace it and get the best of it while keeping the best of the person-to-person as well.
What do you think the biggest challenge is going forward for PRI?
I think one of them is just what we talked about, that the advent of technology in our lives is so changing everything that people are starting to want to receive things differently. They don't want to take a lot of time for something. We're used to everything happening instantly. And adapting, for all of us, I think, adapting to these changes that are happening in our society is a huge challenge for all of us. And then, of course, the economics of the whole country have shifted, and that has become a challenge across our field. Everybody's having to do more with less. Those are realities that we face in getting things out there. And one of our approaches to that is we've developed a delivery mechanism that when we're talking about offender-based populations such as impaired drivers, allows it to be an offender-supported system because the tax base just isn't there anymore to support the kind of services that need to be done. And by spreading it around better to the people who are using the services, we can get more done. So responding to the changes in our society is, I think, a big challenge for all of us.
I agree. Before we wrap this up, this has been fascinating, and I'm sure we could go on for a long time. But if somebody would like more information about the services that you have, what's the best way for them to get a hold of PRI or to get a sense of what it is that you're delivering?
Well, a great place to start would be our website, which is primeforlife.org, primeforlife.org, primeforlife.org. And there they can get everything, including the research that's been done on the program. We're not only base what we do on research, we research what we're doing, and data on the program is on the website as well. And then we are happy to talk with people. They can give us a call, get our number off the website, give us a call. Any of our staff will be happy to talk with them and see if there's a way that we can help them better serve their populations.
Ray, I want to thank you for spending the time with me this morning, carving some time out of your busy schedule. I've been a fan of yours. I've been a fan of PRI's for a long time, and I'm sure you know that.
I do, and I appreciate it. And it goes both ways, Jim. I'm a big fan of what ADE is doing, and I think I don't know a lot of your other staff, but the other ones I know have sort of picked up your spirit. I see your spirit that you bring to ADE as being one that is very open to thinking differently, to seeing what needs are and seeing how can we be adaptable in meeting those needs. And we have, in working with so many different systems, we work with systems that use a variety of assessment instruments. And I don't mean in any way to say anything negative about any of the others. We've got a lot of good things out there that people can choose from. But what I have seen from ADE that I've not seen anywhere else is you don't just come in and say, we have this product, you should use it. You come in and really try to understand how you can work with what's in the system to make everything better. The way that we have cooperated together, for example, to build in a piece in Prime for Life that makes the return of the needs information to the impaired driver or drug offender or whoever we're talking about with at any given point, to make that a richer and more meaningful experience. I have not encountered that with any other type of assessment service. And the openness, the willingness to try to say, how can we work together to do this better, has been remarkable.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I really don't know any other way. We're in this together, and the more we can work together, the better off we're going to be, and the better off the people we serve are going to be. So I appreciate your words. But again, thank you so much for your time. We could go on. We could go on a long time. The history you gave was fascinating. The history you gave at the beginning about your time during the early 70s was fascinating. I didn't know any of that. So, okay, Ray. Thanks again. I'll be in touch.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the ADE Spotlight Podcast. I hope you found it insightful. If you have any comments, suggestions for future topics, or would like to be featured in an upcoming episode, please let us know. You may reach us by email at support@adeincorp.com.